Welcome to In the Loop with Peter McGinn, Wilmington's new Assistant Superintendent. In the Loop is a monthly video magazine brought to you by the Wilmington Superintendent of Schools. Peter will offer Wilmington residents a closer look at school business and respond directly to email questions, concerns, ideas, and suggestions. And now, here's Peter.
Hello, my name is Peter McGinn. I'm the Assistant Superintendent for the Wilmington Public Schools. I'd like to welcome you to the third edition of In the Loop. In the Loop is a presentation designed to inform Wilmington residents of things happening in their public schools. I'm excited about the third edition of In the Loop. The author of the bestseller, The 7 Characteristics of Highly Effective People, Stephen Covey, suggests that when identifying and wanting to accomplish a goal, that we begin with the end in mind. We'll talk about how best to prepare students to enter the Wilmington Public Schools at pre-kindergarten and kindergarten, and we'll also talk about what parents should be thinking of as their children begin to think about exiting the Wilmington Public Schools. We'll talk to 3 educators who have valuable information to share with you. We'll talk to the head teachers of the Boutwell and Wildwood Early Childhood Centers, and we'll also speak with the Director of Guidance for Wilmington High School and Middle School. Right now, I'd like to introduce you to Marie Kaelane, Director of Guidance for Wilmington's Middle School and High School. My conversation with Marie will focus on what parents should know and what parents should be doing as they consider post-high school options for their child. Hi, Marie.
Hi,
how are you?
Peter.
Nice to have you here on In the Loop.
Thank you for having me.
Marie, what I think would be of parent interest is, and what I'd like you to do is perhaps to share some secrets or insider information, if you will. And perhaps, as a parent, I believe, you've thought about how best to prepare your son or daughter as they begin to approach high school years and then as they approach the 12th grade. And I would ask you to think about those things that place students in the best possible position in order to pursue or open doors of opportunities post-high school. For some children, that would be college, and for others, other opportunities that they see as desirable. So tell us a little bit about your thoughts when you talk to parents of 8th graders as they begin to come to the 9th grade, and what are some of those things that parents need to think about as their youngsters enter high school and as they move through high school, with the end in mind of graduation?
Well, I think one of the first things that parents should consider is really the aptitudes and the interests of their children. As a parent, I know I had a lot of hopes and dreams for my son and daughter, but they had other interests and other things they pursued and became successful at. So we all have ideas for our kids, but I think what we're going to try to do now in the guidance department about the middle and high schools is we're going to work on creating some career exploration components to our programs beginning in the 8th grade so that students have information about what they are talented in as well as what they're interested in order to choose a career path, to know what they need to do to accomplish that goal. In some cases, you don't have to go to a 4-year college. In other cases, if depending on the competitiveness of the school, you want to just make sure that the student is taking the right course load, looking towards the appropriate rigor in their program, and that they're able to make educated decisions based on who they are and what they want to accomplish. So we're hoping to do that. We want to begin that process in the 8th grade before they begin to schedule for their 9th grade program. And again in the 10th grade, revisit it before we begin the college piece so that they are ready to make really solid decisions about the right schools for them and who they are, academically as well as personally, and as far as interests as well.
Something you said I think is very important, and that is because I had the experience myself as a parent, and I had these hopes and desires for my sons, and as you mentioned, they had different ideas. And I think sometimes it's hard for parents, or parents make things perhaps more difficult for their children when the parents are hoping that the child goes down the pathway that the parent prefers for that child, rather than being very respectful of the child's interests and talents that may be somewhat different from the parents' view.
Right, and I think this is probably a good place to discuss the college climate right now, and what is going on as far as competitiveness in schools. The schools that we all attended, including state and public, state university, public universities, are far more competitive than they were when I went to college. And I know that parents are not apprised of just how competitive it is. And as guidance counselors and those in the field who work in this area on a day-to-day basis, even we can't predict. It's really, shifting sands. We can look to some colleges that we used to consider safety schools back years ago that now are very, very competitive. Schools have really upped the ante in a lot of ways. So, parents have aspirations of their students attending certain colleges that just aren't realistic. And again, this is where the hopes and dreams come into place. And sometimes you need to adjust the plan a little bit. And that's not to say that the student cannot seek a college education. And if they make very good use of it, be as successful as they could be coming out of a very prestigious college. But at times you have to adjust what your goals are for your children. And I think that's a wake-up call to parents. A lot of times by the time the students are junior and senior year, they're expecting more and expecting their children to be accepted to schools that just aren't realistic anymore, and that maybe 15 or 20 years would have been realistic for that student.
You talk about the shifting sands and many colleges really upping the ante in terms of who they're accepting and the kinds of students they're looking for. Can you talk a little bit about, we know that colleges are interested in youngsters who achieve well and have good grades. We know that colleges use, to some degree, SAT scores and other types of pre-college testing. But we also have heard quite a bit in the last few years about colleges really wanting to add to their community students that have other talents and what some refer to as well-roundedness. So as we, from a parent perspective, and as they build their child's, so to speak, resume, so that when they are applying to colleges, they can demonstrate this well-roundedness. What are some of those activities and perhaps other areas that would be important for youngsters to have experience in and be able to say, I've done this, if you wouldn't mind?
Sure. I think that one of the most important things that a student who's looking at a highly competitive college needs to have is that little niche thing, that thing that makes them completely different. For example, students sometimes have a particularly strong skill in athletics that isn't baseball, hockey, football, basketball. It's that other athletic event. We've had students that have done some very interesting things, horseback riding, precision shooting, anything like that is a skill that is very different, that sets them apart. That's one way, especially in the more competitive colleges, to set you. If you play the oboe, for example, something like that that's very, very different that the average kid doesn't do. Now, for the more mainstream, middle of the road kind of kid, I think it's important to see a very balanced program with adequate rigor in their academics. It doesn't matter if they're not an athlete, but the kind of things they need to do is show interest in the community. Volunteerism is huge, and it's not just that one individual, I worked at cleaning up a park for a day. It's the long-standing interest
Commitment
in
to
exactly.
some service.
making their community better, really committing to that. And seeing that sort of interest and that sort of drive and commitment really speaks to the colleges. They like to see that. They like to see that they're involved in service projects in their schools. They like to see students who start up their own projects in school, who are the founding, members of their club or
Youngsters
organization.
who take an initiative.
Right now at the high school we have a recycling club, and these kids started this up grassroots and got recycling buckets and gave them to all the classrooms and the offices, and it really has gone a long way this year. And these kids come in on a weekly basis and collect everything, and it's quite time consuming. It takes a lot, and it's really, it does help. It helps our environment, it helps our community, and these kids, are going to do this over the long term. And out of this, many of these students have found a true interest in ecology and our environment, and are pursuing those sorts of interests outside in the college arena. So it's very interesting how sometimes those particular meaningful activities eventually translate themselves into something they may want to do in the future.
Okay. And to some degree are attractive to some colleges.
Sure.
One thing may be attractive to one college versus another, and so again, that well-roundedness and trying to do some unique things perhaps that set people apart, or candidates in the application process apart. The other thing I'd like to ask you about is we've all heard about the late bloomer, the youngster who perhaps is going to take another year or two to mature. And sometimes I've heard the term used, defer acceptance, or even for those youngsters who weren't accepted, but maybe need a few more years to be out on their own to do something. What are some of those opportunities that you're aware of that are valuable and that would, if that youngster chooses to apply to college someday, would again serve as time well spent?
Right. Well, you see a lot of students, especially young athletes, who truly want to pursue athletics at the college level. They'll sometimes go for an additional year in a prep school, and that's a costly alternative. For the student who really needs to get their sea legs a bit about the whole academic piece, the community college is a great resource for that. Inexpensive and truly a place where they can explore different careers, even get a certificate in an area if they're not sure if they want to pursue a full-length college degree. Also, students who are accepted to college and do defer their entrance for a year or two, a lot of times those are the kids who do city year or will intern in an area that they're interested, so that when they do enter college, they've got a year of experience in that area. So there are a lot of things kids can do to make that year profitable and to make it a valuable experience.
Good. I like the idea of, the community college, certainly the reasonable expense of it compared to experimenting in a school where your parents have committed tens of thousands of dollars, but rather to spend some time in a community college, perhaps in a certificate program that really allows the individual to get their feet wet and get a sense of, do I like this? Is this what I want to do? So I think that's great. Anything else that comes to mind as we think about what the parent of an 8th grader, 9th grader, 10th grader should be thinking about in addition to the student focusing on academics and athletics, and also some, you've mentioned other experiences, co-curricular experiences. Anything else come to mind?
Well, as a guidance counselor in both the middle and high school, quite honestly, it's frustrating to see students who do not take their academics seriously, because it is a rude awakening when we get to senior year. And good habits begin in the early years, and if not formed by the time 7th and 8th grade comes along, are sometimes difficult to put in place. I think parents need to reinforce the importance of homework, study, attaining good study skills, creating a place in their homes where kids can sit down and find a quiet spot without computers, without cell phones on, without any kind of distraction, because that really will translate into better grades and in turn into a better candidate when it comes time to apply to college. And another thing that I think is really practicality. parents need to start thinking about the present climate in the financial aid situation, which is becoming a little scary. They're cutting back. The federal government is not giving the loans that they were giving out. Grants are drying up. And I think parents really need to seriously think about how they're going to fund their students' educations, and that really needs to begin early. And that's another thing that we in guidance begin to talk about, is getting MIFA to speak to our 7th and 8th grade parents, as well as our junior, senior parents, as they do in the high school. I think that's important because that price tag is shocking. And when they get to senior year, it's unfortunate when you see the student who does get into the wonderfully competitive school and has to choose something that may not be as prestigious or competitive because the financing isn't there, and that's difficult. But a realistic, situation. That's what happens nowadays.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure having you here, and hopefully people at home have got some insight. I'm sure that you would agree that if parents do have a question, then a guidance staff at the middle school and high school certainly would be happy to speak to those people about some of the things that we've talked about today, and again, just how to prepare youngsters to position themselves in the best way for increasing their opportunities post high school.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you
great.
very much.
Yes, great to be here.
Okay,
thank you.
Thanks.
Gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Sandy Dumont. Sandy is the head teacher for the Boutwell Early Childhood Center in Wilmington, and we're going to spend some time talking with Sandy about parents who have children entering school in September. And there are a lot of activities going on leading up to September. Sandy will talk a little bit to us about those, and other pieces of information that would be important so that parents can best prepare their youngsters to enter school in September. So welcome, Sandy. Nice to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Sandy, Boutwell is a school of pre-kindergarten classrooms,
to kindergarten.
Kindergarten classrooms, so it's really a school that really focuses on young children. And
Exactly.
I think that the people of Wilmington are lucky to have 2 such centers that specialize solely in young children. And so tell me about those things that you think are most important for parents to have in mind as their youngsters are getting ready to come to you.
Okay, I'd just like to go into, I think, probably what's going to be happening now. We had our formal registration in March, but that's not to say if parents haven't registered their children, they can certainly come by either the Wildwood Early Childhood Center or the Boutwell and register their children Monday through Friday. We welcome that. But assuming that their children are registered, that they've attended the screening, which was about 2 weeks ago, I believe, at the Wildwood. What's going to happen next, parents can expect to get a packet of information from us probably the beginning of July. And that packet of information will have their teacher and room assignment. And I think that's really helpful because parents can then talk that up through the summer, referencing the teacher's name. Also our handbook, and this is true with both sites, our handbook, which has everything from our teachers' roster to our start and ending times, information about lunch, all of those things that parents really need to know. Also in the packet is an invitation to an evening parent meeting in August, and I believe it's August 20th. At that point, Mr. Fredette and I hold separate meetings at each of our sites, and we sort of go through the handbook. We try to answer any questions parents have, any concerns that they have, go through our procedures and protocols. It's at that meeting, too, that parents get the bus number and the stop, which is a huge thing when children are first starting school. So that's all that really important information. We follow up in August, late August, August 27th, with a day orientation. This is the really fun one for the kids. They get to come into our schools, meet their teacher, spend time in the classroom, and take a ride in the big yellow bus, which is, I think, if nothing else, that's all they care about. pretty much. But it's a nice segue so that when the children do start after Labor Day, they're a little bit more accustomed to the school. And I really should mention too that we also have allowed any private preschools that are sending kids to our kindergartens to come and visit our kindergartens. We did lots of tours in mid-May. Which I think is very beneficial. Parents get a look at our schools, the teachers get a look, and the kids get to spend time in each classroom. So by the time they enter our programs, they have a good sense of what we're all about.
I think over the years you've encountered, no doubt, I've seen some youngsters who come to school who are particularly anxious, and parents as well. And certainly, I think getting to school before school starts, as you offer, and also getting on the bus and getting a ride on the yellow school bus are all designed to lower that anxiety. But nevertheless, youngsters still arrive that day, and parents who are anxious about the change and schooling, and what are some of the effective strategies that you might suggest to a parent about in order to alleviate youngsters' anxiety and, once again, the parents' anxiety?
Exactly. Well, hopefully, with the information meetings, the parents are a little bit more comfortable. So if the parents are comfortable, usually the kids are somewhat comfortable. I always suggest to parents to really talk it up over the summer. Ride by the school, reference the teacher's name, and answer their questions honestly. I think a nice way to do that is to play school with the kids and kind of work through different scenarios and help kids to kind of figure out how they'd function in the classroom, what they do if they had a question, or if maybe something in lunch wasn't right, what would they do? And I said, if you play school with them, those kind of things come out, and those kind of anxieties and concerns that kids have. So that's a really good thing for parents to do, I think.
I think one of the pieces of advice that I've seen from year to year to year with the youngsters that we've been talking about here, those youngsters that do have perhaps a little bit of difficulty or greater difficulty in becoming comfortable in the new school, is the separation. Although apparently many youngsters do ride buses to school, but whether it's at the bus stop or at the school if they're being driven to school, that although the youngster may be perhaps quite emotional, crying, that perhaps one of the best things that a parent can do is just trust the teachers, trust the head teacher, and say goodbye, give a kiss, and then cleanly break away.
That's what we usually suggest. We do suggest to parents that they let us handle it. I know it's very traumatic for a parent to leave a child crying, but 9 times out of 10, within about 5 minutes, they stop crying. It's just, and it's the newness. I think once, and every day we just ask parents, it's really a good thing if they can just put them on the bus. It eliminates a lot of that, because I think when a parent comes in, that's when the anxiety starts. I think it's all, we have more difficulty with kids who come in like as car riders, because they're with mom or dad. But we rest assured that they do stop crying usually within 5 or 10 minutes tops, and if they were still crying, we'd certainly call them. But usually once they get in, we try to, when we look at the class list, if we know some kids who are probably going to have some difficulties, whether the parent has told us that or the preschool, we might try to put a buddy in there in a classroom, a familiar face. That always helps too, I think.
Final question. Once a parent is, the end of August has arrived, the youngsters have come in for those meetings that you've mentioned, the parents and the youngsters, and then school starts, you said, after Labor Day, a little later than the other grades in the Wilmington schools. When is the first formal opportunity for a parent to visit school and to hear about their youngsters' progress or how their youngsters settling in their classroom? When does that occur?
At both of the sites, we usually have an open house, and it's usually toward the late September. At that point, the parents come in, the teachers really review more of their procedures, routines, talk about curriculum to the parents, have a lot of things available for parents to look at, and that just gives them a general overview. And for parents who are a little anxious after that, we want parents to know that anytime they need to call us, they have a question, a concern, they don't have to wait for a parent conference, they don't have to wait for an open house, they certainly can call us anytime. And we do have 2 report card periods, one in January and one in May, and parents will have an opportunity then to go in for a parent conference. But I guess I want to stress to we know that this is probably the first experience at public school. We want it to be a positive one, so that parents should know that our door is always open. If there is a burning question that cannot wait till the August meeting, pick up the phone and give us a call. We really would appreciate that, because the more we can do to make the transition smooth, the better off the child is, and the parent feels better too.
Great, great. Well, thank you very much for being here today, and hopefully some of the information you've provided will make for a smoother transition to kindergarten come the fall. So thank you once again, Sandy.
Thank you very much.
It gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Jason Fredette. Jason is the head teacher at the Wildwood Early Childhood Center. Welcome, Jason.
Welcome,
Nice
Peter.
to see you. Nice to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
We just had an opportunity to talk to your counterpart, Sandy Dumont, and we focused on the immediate time leading up to a youngster entering kindergarten or entering school. What I'd like to do is to look back a little further, a little younger in a child's life, and I think parents begin getting anxious about a child enrolling in school, and how will my child do? How will he or she get good grades? And a lot of those anxieties start beginning back perhaps preconception.
Birth, right? Yeah.
What I'd like to do is maybe focus on or give some information to those parents of youngsters who are 1 year old, 2 years old, 3 years old, who are perhaps still some time away from entering the Wildwood or the Boutwell. But what kinds of things do you think about that are important for parents of young children to prepare them to get to school and come to school and be successful and perhaps most important, to be comfortable in school? Certainly. So what have you learned?
I think I'll start with a disclaimer, and we do talk about this word prepare, that this isn't prep school for to school, that it is a wonderful journey, and that people should enjoy it and understand that children do develop at different times. I'll make some suggestions and things that people should look for, but that not every child is, if you're comparing one child to other, is going to develop at the same time. These things come at different rates, and that they should enjoy that time before school and not be picturing that Harvard diploma over the crib. But to start off, I guess I'll look at really kind of 3 areas, Peter. One being mainly to start the health and the physical well-being. I think, some is common sense, but I think children should go visit the doctor, visit the dentist, should be, eating proper nutrition and have good nutritional value, have proper rest. I think setting up routines for children with a bedtime, an eating time, a wake-up time, those kind of things, even in the long run, prepare children to enter school at the time. I think activity, active play, children should be outside, they should be running, they should be able to look for those gross motor development as well. Bikes and tricycles at this point. Fine motor kind of skills, looking physically too. Children getting chances to manipulate puzzles and games and beads and things like that. Another disclaimer, make sure that things are appropriate and not too small for children to choke at our early ages. These kind of physical development things are things that we take into account as they enter school. Also, a big part of, obviously early childhood programs, but as children develop all the way through, is the social emotional development. I think children, develop, again, that at different rates as well, physically, but also socially and emotionally. We look for children to be able to start to use self-control in certain situations. Not me, I think we're always worrying about that immediate gratification. I think sometimes children bring that into school and can make things difficult for them if they're always waiting. They do have to withhold that gratification at times. I think they need to be able to be around other children, chances, play groups or cousins or things like that, to interact with other children, but also they need to be able to start spending some time alone and not always need a constant entertaining, and be able to be alone and spend some time alone and work alone. I think getting them familiar with different adults is always well too. They will see other adults and not just always mom or dad, but be able to meet other adults and feel comfortable with other adults that are the proper adults, I guess I would say as well. So that social emotional, if there's siblings sometimes, I think they can model for kids, and I think even sometimes if there's younger siblings, it's a nice leadership role at times for children as well. When you're looking at kind of the entering kindergarten, we do look, or preschool, or any of those grades too, I think it's obvious sometimes if children have had a nice background in a firm kind of ground laying or base for that. When you look now at the other kind of the academic end of things, I think language and the acquisition of language is something that's always very important with children. And also the acquisition of kind of, we call those pre-academic skills. We're not quite ready going to label these things academic. I sometimes think, I worry, and some people have different philosophies, but 2-year-olds looking at flashcards with the periodic table on it, I would not really, unless there's a real interest. I think a lot of that kind of thing with language comes right from talking and discussion. A lot of work's been done around the amount of words that a child hears before they even enter kindergarten, and that some children are at a great disadvantage before they enter kindergarten or preschool just because of the kind of lack of language and stimuli that they've heard. Conversations about everything is a good conversation. I think talking about the world around you, letting them know that questions are good to ask and not knowing the answer is good. Being able to sometimes see you be able to look up and not know an answer. I think that's a very powerful model sometimes, is to have a child ask you a question. Oh, I don't really know that. Maybe, I used to say, look it up in an encyclopedia. I think that would be even dating myself at that point. I think, there's other ways and that you could use information and model that for children. The biggest thing I could say too was reading. And you and I joked a little bit before and talked about Jim Trelease, really world-renowned literacy and read aloud guru, who talks about that. Reading to someone in the womb, and even just being able to hear the intonation of language and hearing the words coming off the tongue, even at that early age, really exposing children to print in all different ways. He talks about other ways, not just the regular, storybook, but sometimes even wordless books, or sometimes even books that nursery rhymes are very important. Children have to build up what we call the phonemic awareness. It's a real big precursor to reading, and that is them being able to hear sounds and actually manipulate those sounds. Unfortunately, too often we say, excuse me, those nursery rhymes have gone away, and those were very valuable tools that taught rhyming and rhythm to children. I think those are still valuable tools that parents have. There's all kinds of literature that they can get. Thinking of Brown Bear, these predictable books that give children routines with what they're going to have and kind of get the idea. Even sometimes building up an idea of print. I know they will open a book and they're automatically drawn to the pictures, absolutely. But sometimes even at some point explaining how the words are the pictures give great information as well. But words, looking at numeracy, the world around us provides numerous, excuse the pun here, numerous ways to teach numbers, the conservation of numbers or the correspondence. Counting as many things as you can. When we get children to kindergarten, they count and they count and they count and they count even more. And it's really such an important concept to do, that you can count things all the world around you. A trip to the grocery store can be a really impromptu lesson on kind of sizes and of shapes and things. And really, I think introducing these things should be interest-based. I think at this age it's very important.
Yeah, and I think that all of these things that you mentioned, print-rich, language-rich, number-rich environments, and you couple that with a couple of other things, the modeling that you mentioned, that having fun with rhymes and nursery rhymes and having fun with numbers, and I think is very important. And again, the modeling of enjoying reading and enjoying using numbers, I think is certainly something to be said for those things. And you know, mentioning Jim Trelease, the read aloud guru, he talks about the time, that the very special time that he used to spend with his daughters, I believe, and carving out that part of the day, whether it's laying on the bed before going to sleep or some real very loving, comfortable situation that a child will value and will perhaps yearn for repetitiveness so that the reading does occur daily. So I think all of those things make an awful lot of sense. And I think for those people who, I think resources, I'm thinking about resources in the community for parents of young children, that a public library, and particularly Wilmington's public library, is a wonderful resource, right?
Yep.
And if people are unfamiliar with what is a good book for my 1-year-old, my 2-year-olds, that those librarians are just wonderful resources in suggesting this would be a wonderful book for your child, or these 4 or 5 books would be wonderful.
And I'll say, I hate to make this, we talked so much about Jim Trelease, I guess I would be remiss if I didn't mention his book, the Read Aloud Handbook. I think, and I buy for friends or in-laws or brothers and sisters who have children. I think it's a gentleman who I've seen several times and is very impressive. And this book not only talks about a lot of the things that I've just really scratched the surface on, it also, as a part of it, has a read aloud library. And he really has done a nice job of kind of getting together a, you know, kind of a fountain of wealth of books there, and he categorizes them by age, by what kind of book it is. It's been really helpful for parents or future parents that I've given this book to, and I think it still is a really a standard in the field of looking at books, and it really, I think, it would be a helpful resource if anybody was more interested, in a good starting out point for that.
So I think you've broken your comments almost in half, and one which is perhaps so important because it's such a foundation of those skills or attributes that youngsters need, is on that whole affective side, or the social emotional, being comfortable with in groups of children, being comfortable with other adults other than their parents. And then the other side of things, and that is the pre-academic skills that of the reading, being read to, and having fun with the things that we've mentioned. I think those are valuable. Any other thoughts that you can that you think are important?
And even expand that a little bit. I didn't, get much into writing. Our art projects, I think, are something that continue as they in the early childhood, but all kinds of arts and crafts and projects like that. Painting, drawing, they look, working on with a pencil. I think we're too often we're focusing on just the 2 years old writing the name. That will come. That's something that will come. Really, to let them experience the world, for me, is a really important thing. Museums, libraries, zoos. There's no better experience than firsthand experience. Right. And there doesn't always have to be a plane ride or even that far away. There's options that you could right in town, or just really close, that you can experience with their child. And I think the most important thing is, and that everyone knows, that is giving your child that love and that attention and that time that you have.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate talking with you.
Thanks for having me, Peter.
Yeah, thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed this edition of In the Loop. And as always, I ask that you consider sending me questions or suggestions for a future show at my email address, which is displayed at the bottom of the screen. So long, and I hope that you have an enjoyable summer. Again, any of our educators that you saw today, Marie Kaelane at the high school, Jason Fredette at the Wildwood Early Childhood Center, and Sandy Dumont at the Boutwell Early Childhood Center are wonderful resources for you. Please use them, and I look forward to when we meet again. Thank you.